There is a particular kind of pain that comes from hearing a word you never expected to hear, spoken by the person you love most in the world. Maybe it happened during an argument, the kind that started over something small, a holiday plan, a comment about their parenting, a disagreement that should have stayed minor. And somewhere in the middle of it, your adult child looked at you, or texted you, or said it quietly on the phone, "You're a narcissist." Maybe it wasn't even said directly to you. Maybe you overheard it, or a family member mentioned it, or you found it in a message that wasn't meant for your eyes. However it arrived, it landed the same way, heavy, confusing, the kind of word that keeps you up at night, turning it over, asking yourself the question underneath all the others. Is that true? Am I that? Here is what I want you to know before we go any further. This is not just going to be a video where we sit in that pain together and leave you there. We are going to walk through this step by step. How to tell whether the word is fair or unfair. How to look at your own behavior honestly without falling apart. And exactly what to say and do next, whether the label fits you or it doesn't. By the end, you will have a clear way forward, not just a deeper ache. This video is not going to tell you what to think about yourself. It's going to give you something more useful than reassurance or guilt. It's going to give you clarity. By the end of this, you will understand where this word actually comes from, what it really means, how to tell the difference between a fair criticism and an unfair label, and what to do with all of it, whether the word fits or whether it doesn't. Maybe you've spent the days since replaying old memories, searching through decades of birthdays and dinners and arguments, trying to find the moment that made them see you this way. Maybe you've gone the other direction entirely, telling yourself it's just a word they picked up somewhere, that it doesn't mean anything, that you shouldn't let it bother you. Neither extreme tends to bring real peace. The truth, as it usually does, lives somewhere in the more complicated middle, and that's exactly where we're going to spend the next several minutes. Take a breath. We're going to walk through this together, calmly, honestly, the way a trusted friend would. Part 1. Why this word is everywhere now. If you feel like this word didn't exist 20 years ago, at least not the way it's used now, you're not wrong. Narcissist used to be a clinical term, used carefully by psychologists to describe a specific and fairly rare personality disorder. Today, it shows up in everyday arguments, in social media captions, in text messages between people who have never opened a psychology textbook in their lives. Your adult child likely grew up in a different emotional landscape than you did. They came of age during a period when therapy language moved out of the therapist's office and into ordinary conversation. Words like boundaries, trauma, gaslighting, and narcissist became part of how an entire generation talks about relationships, including family relationships. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Having language for emotional experiences can be genuinely useful, but it also means the words get used more loosely than they were ever intended to be used. Here is the uncomfortable truth. In this new emotional vocabulary, almost any parent who held a boundary, said no, expected respect, or simply disagreed with their adult child can end up hearing this word. Setting a limit on babysitting, disagreeing with a parenting choice, expecting a phone call to be returned, expressing hurt feelings. Any of these, in certain conversations, can get labeled the same way that genuine, diagnosable narcissistic abuse gets labeled. That doesn't mean your child used the word carelessly or that they don't mean it. It simply means that before you accept this word as the final truth about who you are, it's worth understanding what it actually describes and what it doesn't. Part 2. What real narcissistic behavior actually looks like. Let's set emotion aside for a moment and look at this practically. Genuine narcissistic behavior isn't about how loving you feel toward your child, or how many sacrifices you've made, or how good your intentions are. It shows up in a specific pattern, and that pattern is about what happens when you don't get your way. Here is the simplest test, and it's not about how someone talks. It's about how someone behaves when a boundary is set. Picture an ordinary moment. You tell your adult child you can't make it to a family gathering, or you say you're not available to watch the grandchildren this weekend, or you simply disagree with something they've said. A reasonable person, even one who is disappointed, will accept that, perhaps with a sigh, perhaps with a moment of frustration, and then they move on. They might say, "Oh, that's too bad, we'll miss you," and the conversation continues normally. Someone with genuine narcissistic patterns reacts differently. You'll see a flash of something sharper, a sudden coldness in the voice, a sarcastic remark, a silence that's clearly meant to punish rather than process. They might say something like, "Wow, okay, I guess I'll just figure it out myself," delivered in a tone designed to make you feel the weight of having disappointed them. Or they escalate, pushing harder, repeating the request as though saying no the first time didn't count, testing whether you'll cave under the pressure. The key insight here is this: it was never really about the specific thing you said no to. It was a test of whether your boundary would hold. If you give in, the lesson they learn is that your boundaries are negotiable, and the same pattern repeats next time, a little bit worse. So ask yourself honestly, looking back over your relationship with your child, not at one moment, but at the pattern. When you've said no to them over the years, have you generally been met with disappointment that fades, or with punishment that escalates? When you've expressed your own needs, do they typically adjust, even reluctantly, or do they consistently make you pay for having needs at all? This is not about a single bad day or a single sharp comment said in the heat of an argument. Everyone has those. This is about a consistent pattern, over time, of control disguised as love. There's another version of this test that's worth knowing, because it shows up in quieter ways. Pay attention to what happens when your attention is somewhere else, when you're in the middle of a conversation with someone else, focused on a task, or simply present in a moment that doesn't involve them. A reasonable person waits, or gently interjects and accepts being asked to wait a moment. Someone testing whether your attention belongs to them will talk over you, repeat themselves louder, or find a way to make the moment about them, regardless of what was already happening. And notice, too, what happens at the exact end of a visit or a phone call, right as you're about to leave or hang up. That's often when something heavy gets dropped deliberately, a piece of difficult news or a complaint, timed precisely so there's no room left to address it properly. If this happens once, it might simply be poor timing. If it happens every single time you try to leave, it's worth noticing. None of this is a checklist you fill out to render a verdict on your child. It's a way of slowing down and looking at the actual shape of years of interactions, instead of reacting to the sting of one single word. Part 3. The quiet side of this. Noble suffering. There's a quieter version of this pattern that's worth understanding too, because it can hide even from the person doing it. Some people build their entire identity around a story that goes like this: I am a good person. Life has been unfair to me, but I keep being good anyway, no matter what it costs me. It can sound something like this, maybe even familiar. I gave up so much for this family. Nobody appreciates everything I've done. I always do the right thing, and this is how I'm repaid. On its own, said once, in a moment of genuine hurt, this is simply being human. We have all said some version of these words when we felt unseen. But when this becomes the constant lens through which every disagreement is viewed, when every boundary your child sets becomes proof of their selfishness, and every sacrifice you've made becomes a debt they now owe. Something has shifted from honest feeling into a tool. The story isn't being used to process pain anymore. It's being used to win. This is worth sitting with honestly, without rushing to defend yourself and without rushing to condemn yourself either. Somewhere inside you, you already know the difference between the times you've genuinely been hurt by your child's choices and the times you've used that hurt, even unconsciously, to make them feel guilty enough to do what you wanted. Nobody is asking you to be perfect. Every parent, across every generation, has moments of this. The question isn't whether you've ever done it. The question is whether it's the pattern or the exception. Part 4. When the label isn't fair. Now let's talk about the other side of this, because it matters just as much. There are entire categories of perfectly healthy, perfectly normal parenting behavior that get mistaken for narcissism in today's conversations, and you deserve to know the difference. Having an opinion that differs from your child's is not narcissism. Disagreeing with how they're raising their children, even if you keep that opinion mostly to yourself, is not narcissism. Wanting your own evenings free, your own boundaries around your time and your home, your own life that doesn't revolve entirely around being available to them. None of this is narcissism. It's simply being a person with needs of your own, which every healthy adult is allowed to have. Saying no without offering a lengthy explanation is not narcissism either, even though it might be interpreted that way by someone who's used to a different emotional language. You do not owe anyone, not even your own children, an essay justifying every limit you set. Here is something worth holding on to. A relationship doesn't become abusive simply because someone in it feels disappointed. Your adult child is allowed to feel hurt by a boundary you set. That hurt is real to them, but their hurt feelings do not automatically mean you did something wrong. Two things can be true at once. They can feel genuinely upset, and you can have done nothing unreasonable. Consider a common scene. You decline an invitation to a holiday gathering because you're simply tired, or you'd already made other plans, or you just didn't want to go. Your child is disappointed, maybe even hurt, and says so. That disappointment is real and worth acknowledging with kindness. But choosing your own evening, even when it disappoints someone you love, is not an act of harm. It's an act of being a whole person, which is exactly what you spent years teaching them to become. If you find yourself replaying years of memories, searching for evidence either to convict or acquit yourself, try this instead. Ask yourself not, was I ever imperfect? Because of course you were, everyone is. But did I consistently try to control them through guilt, punishment, or withdrawal of love when they didn't do what I wanted? If the honest answer is no, then this label, however painful to hear, may simply not fit, and you are allowed to know that, gently, without needing to prove it to anyone else. Part 5. When the label might be pointing at something real. This next part takes more courage to hear, so take it slowly. And remember that looking honestly at yourself is not the same as condemning yourself. If certain things in your relationship with your child have been consistent for years, not isolated moments, but patterns, it's worth genuinely considering whether there's truth underneath the word, even if the word itself feels too harsh. Do conversations with your child often end with them apologizing to you, even when they were the one who brought up a legitimate concern? Have you found yourself saying things like, "After everything I've done for you," as a way to end a disagreement rather than resolve it? When your child sets a boundary about visits, about parenting choices, about how much you're involved in their life, does your first instinct lean toward respecting it or toward finding a way around it? Has your love for them at times felt conditional on their compliance, even if you never would have said that out loud, even if you didn't fully realize it yourself? These are not easy questions, and answering them honestly does not make you a bad parent. It makes you someone capable of growth, which is rarer and more valuable than most people realize. If you recognize some of these patterns in yourself, that recognition is actually the hardest and most important part. Everything after it gets easier. There's a woman I'll call Diane, a mother of 2 grown children, who told a friend once that for years she believed she was simply a parent who cared a lot. Looking back honestly, after her daughter used a word that stung deeply, she realized that caring a lot had sometimes meant making her daughter feel responsible for Diane's moods, that a quiet visit could turn cold if Diane didn't get enough attention during it, that disagreements often ended with Diane reminding her daughter of everything she'd sacrificed. Diane didn't see herself as controlling. She saw herself as devoted. It took real courage for her to recognize that those 2 things, in her case, had quietly become the same thing. That recognition, painful as it was, became the beginning of an actual repair rather than another argument about whether the word was fair. Part 6. How to respond when you hear the word. When this word lands on you, your nervous system wants to do one of 2 things immediately: defend yourself completely or collapse into total guilt. Neither response actually helps you, and neither response helps your relationship with your child. Instead, try to meet the moment with curiosity rather than a verdict. You might say something like, "That's a hard word to hear. Can you tell me what made you feel that way?" Not as a trap, not to gather ammunition for a counter-argument, but because you genuinely want to understand what experience led them to reach for that word. Listen for the specific moments they describe, not just the label they've attached to them. Sometimes underneath an accusation like this is a very specific, very real hurt, a moment you don't even remember, that meant something different to them than it did to you. Sometimes what they need isn't for you to accept a diagnosis. They need you to see them, to acknowledge a specific moment of pain without you needing to defend every choice you've ever made. You are allowed to say calmly, "I don't think that word describes me, but I do want to understand what happened that made you feel this way." You are also allowed to say, if it's true, "You're right, I did that, and I'm sorry." Both responses can be honest. Both responses keep the door open. What closes the door is either flatly denying their experience exists or collapsing so completely into shame that you can no longer have a clear conversation about what actually happened. Part 7. Repairing what can be repaired. If, after sitting with this honestly, you recognize patterns that need to change, the path forward isn't grand gestures or long emotional speeches. It's consistency, demonstrated quietly over time. If you've used guilt as a tool in the past, the repair isn't a single apology. It's noticing the next time you reach for that tool and choosing not to pick it up. If you've struggled to accept your child's boundaries, the repair is respecting the very next boundary they set, even the small one, even when it's inconvenient, and letting them see that you can do it without punishing them for asking. Tell them plainly, without over-explaining. "I've been thinking about what you said. I want to do better at respecting your space, and I'm going to work on that." Then, simply work on it. Let your actions be the proof, not your words. Trust that's been worn down by years of pattern won't be repaired by a single conversation. It will be repaired by dozens of small moments where you do what you said you would do. And if, after real reflection, you genuinely don't believe the label fits, if you've examined your own behavior honestly and you don't see the pattern they're describing, you can hold that with confidence, without needing your child to agree with you immediately. You can say, "I hear that this is how it felt to you, and I take that seriously. I also know myself, and I don't believe this is who I am. I'm willing to keep talking about it. That is not defensiveness. That is honesty held alongside care. A word, even a heavy one, does not get to define you. What defines you is how you respond when you hear it. Whether you meet it with curiosity instead of collapse, with honesty instead of denial, with the willingness to look closely at yourself without losing yourself in the process. Some of you watching this will walk away from it with a kind of relief, recognizing that the label your child reached for doesn't actually describe who you are, and that you can hold your own truth with a steady hand. Some of you will walk away with something harder, a quiet recognition that there's real work to do and the courage to begin it. Either way, you are not the worst version of yourself that one difficult conversation might suggest. You are someone who loved your child enough to keep watching this video, to keep asking the harder questions, to keep wanting to get this right. Before you go, I'd love to know, of everything we talked about today, which part was hardest for you to hear? Was it recognizing a pattern you hadn't named before? Or was it realizing that a boundary you've always defended isn't something you need to apologize for? Tell us in the comments. There is no wrong answer, and you are not alone in whichever one you chose. This has been Family Bonds After 60. Take care of yourself, and remember, the people who are willing to look honestly at themselves are almost never the ones who actually need to worry.